343 Industries, which is now known as Halo Studios, has released poorly designed, technically deficient Halo-inspired products from their very inception, starting all the way back with, funnily enough, Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, the remaster. And with every successive game, Halos 4, 5, and 6, they've only gotten worse and more brazen in their creative decisions and technical incompetence, culminating in their latest and hopefully last game, Halo Campaign Evolved. People are calling this remake a corporate cash grab, and frankly I'm tired of hearing that phrase because it seems to be the go-to insult of every AAA game that flops these days. And it tries to absolve the game developers of any responsibility by pushing the blame on publishers like Microsoft. And in this particular case especially, it simply does not apply. It's pretty clear by every decision that Halo Studios made or didn't make with this project that this was the game they wanted to make with the level of skill that they possess. If this remake was motivated simply by greed, we'd have gotten a much different game, and 343 would not continually make the same mistakes that they've been criticized relentlessly for since their very first game. If 343 Industries, or Halo Studios, or any AAA game studio simply wanted to make money, they would make good video games. Greed is not what's killed Halo over the last 15 years. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If anything, the Halo series would benefit from some suit at Microsoft coming down on them and asking what the fuck is going on here at Halo Studios? Why can't this studio make a single successful game with what used to be our most popular video game IP? And the thing that people miss about Halo specifically is that it was that desire to make money, corporate pressure from Microsoft, those were precisely the set of conditions that created the original games that people like me and many others are still passionate about over 20 years later. Part of why Bungie jumped ship from making games for the Mac to making games for Microsoft is that they saw no future for video games on the Mac and saw greater potential for popularity and success elsewhere.
Despite Bungie being so critical to the Mac for gaming, Apple just really didn't care. And
Bungie, of all video game companies at that time, needed their next project, Halo, to be a massive success. The game that they released prior to Halo, Myth 2, shipped with a disastrous bug that forced Bungie to recall 200,000 copies of the game that were already sitting on store shelves. And that basically negated any profit they would have made from that release. Bungie lost so much on that game that it was the biggest reason they started looking for buyers and eventually were acquired by Microsoft.
Phone rings telling me that Bungie's kind of in financial trouble, talking to some people about potentially being acquired.
And Microsoft knew that they needed a game like Halo to sell their brand new system, the Xbox, and break into the video game console market.
It was going to be really important to Microsoft to have games for the Xbox. That's what was going to make or break it.
Definitely a time when I was open to that kind of conversation. I had money to spend. I desperately needed content for this new platform that was going to be showing up in less than 2 years.
We got bought by Microsoft, and I was thrilled. I was thrilled because I thought, this is the technology, this is the box. I get to have surround sound, game, music.
And it was under that set of circumstances, with a hard deadline set by Microsoft to coincide with the release of the Xbox, that 40 video game developers at Bungie created one of the best video games and most iconic video game series of all time. The fires that forged the original Halo is contrasted sharply with 343 Industries. This was a company that was stood up by Microsoft to continue working on Halo after Bungie's departure from Microsoft Game Studios. And coming in after 2011 to work on what was at the time Microsoft's largest intellectual property and flagship video game title, they were given a budget and opportunities that equaled or exceeded anything Bungie ever had. They already had an established universe, an established story, established characters, an established game engine and tools. They had a blueprint for gameplay to follow. They knew what features the community loved, and right from the very start, they tried to steer Halo into a direction that nobody asked for. Frank O'Connor, the head of 343, had that infamous quote about hiring people that hated Halo to make Halo. Of course, what he really meant by that was they hired people who preferred games like Call of Duty to make Halo more into games like Call of Duty. Beyond just the gameplay, they completely changed the art style of the game. They completely changed the characterization of Master Chief and Cortana. They changed the largest overarching theme in Halo, which is those mysterious Forerunners were actually humans the whole time. And over the last 15 years, they've only continued to double down on their vision vision of what Halo should be, without any input from the fans or the people who are actually good at their games, without any input from the original developers or respect for the original game design.
They never called me over the last 4 years for my input. I don't think they have talked to anybody who was on the original Halo development team. I'm pretty sure they have talked to absolutely no one.
So today, of course, Halo is basically irrelevant, except for every few years we get a new game that subsequently ends up being broken at launch, being unliked, unpopular, and relentlessly made fun of. Halo Studios is a perfect example of a video game developer that is not concerned with making money, which is accomplished primarily by making a popular game. They are not afraid to release bad or unliked video games because Microsoft is simply too generous with the money and the autonomy that they give this studio. They have no fear of the negative repercussions that come from not listening to what the players want, from making creative decisions that are borderline disrespectful to the original artwork, and from releasing games that are unfinished or sometimes in totally unplayable states. And while we've been seeing this for the last 15 years, I think there's no greater monument to their sins than their latest game, the Halo Combat Evolved remake. This game, more than any other, demonstrates the mindset of the people making high-level creative and business decisions at 343 Industries. I mean, first off, the idea that this studio that has failed to release a single successful product thought that they should remake one of the most successful games of all time is incredibly arrogant on its face. And Halo Combat Evolved is probably one of the most difficult games out there to pull off a successful remake of, precisely because of how successful and good the original is even to this day. When it comes to picking a game to remake, generally you're going to look at games that, when they were originally released, were severely limited in one way or another, or told an incomplete story, or had some kind of grand idea that was never fully fleshed out or properly executed. A great example of a video game series that would make a great candidate for a remake would be the Metal Gear series, and we've seen Metal Gear Solid Delta be well received by fans and new players alike. In the early 2000s, stealth video game controls and concepts had not really been perfected. The original games were basically restricted to console until very recently, but even then the modern PC port of the original game pretty much needs to be played with a controller. For a lot of people that only play mouse and keyboard or don't have any older consoles, this makes the game very inaccessible, and even the games couldn't agree on how the controls should be implemented from one release to another. The original PlayStation 2 version of Metal Gear Solid 3, for example, had pressure-sensitive buttons and a totally different set of controls than when the game was ported to Xbox 360, which didn't have that feature. Even the original 2004 Snake Eater release would have its gameplay and controls changed significantly when the Subsistence version of the game released in 2005, switching from a top-down camera to an over-the-shoulder camera. So remaking Metal Gear Solid 3 was not just an opportunity to give our favorite cutscenes and environments a fresh coat of paint. It was an opportunity to unitize and modernize the controls across all platforms and implement many of the gameplay concepts and fluidity that made Metal Gear Solid 5 the best playing game in the series, if not best playing stealth game of all time. When we look at a game like Halo Combat Evolved as a candidate for a remake, we see a completely different picture. Like Metal Gear Solid 3, we see a game that tells a complete story, with great cutscenes and voice acting and an amazing soundtrack and sound design. A game that has fun gameplay, a varied selection of weapons, and a multitude of ways to tackle almost every NPC encounter. The principal difference between a game like Halo and a game like Metal Gear Solid 3, and I'm sure most of you know this, is that Halo was the first game in the first-person shooter genre that perfected the formula for that style of game. It ditched things like large, sprawling inventories, which were more suited to mouse and keyboard, and it completely eclipsed earlier console FPS control schemes that were awkward and clumsy, like you had in games like Medal of Honor and GoldenEye. The system that Halo Combat Evolved created of 2 weapons, grenades, and melee, a form of regenerating health, aim assist, and bullet magnetism, and the control scheme of moving with the left stick and looking with the right stick was so revolutionary that basically every single FPS since has copied that formula in some variation or another. To this day, the original Halo Combat Evolved is still extremely fun and fluid to play. It's still extremely fun to watch someone else play. The cutscenes and voice lines are still fun and full of energy. In fact, this year, I took an Xbox 360 with me up to the national matches and played split-screen Halo in between shooting matches. I also went through and played 2 separate co-op campaigns this year on Legendary through the Master Chief Collection, and even had the opportunity to introduce Halo to one of my friends for the very first time.
Oh, it's on me. Oh, shit.
You just throw a frag at yourself?
No.
Look where your body landed. And speaking of the Master Chief Collection, Halo is still not only an excellent game, it's more accessible now than ever before. You don't need an Xbox to play it. It's been ported to the PC twice. Most of us probably played it for free in our school computer lab. Not to mention the Master Chief Collection goes on sale for a deep discount all the time. And to 343's credit, they did fix most of the bugs and problems that the Master Chief Collection had at launch. I mean, it was completely broken when it first released. In fact, my biggest complaints with the Master Chief Collection come from basically all the stuff that 343 touched, like the UI, servers, loading screens, unified menu, horrible integration of social features, changes to the matchmaking, and so on. Regardless, the original Halo games inside the Master Chief Collection is, I would say, about 95% preserved and accessible by anyone at any time on PC, which means the game basically gets to live forever. With all that said, Halo Combat Evolved is probably not a good candidate for a remake, and anyone with any business sense at all could probably tell you this as well. It's probably the closest any of the Halo games have come to being a perfect game, or at least it's the only one in the series that's totally self-contained. However, Halo Studios, with their excellent track record of making games, they looked at this and said, we can do that better. And that's why this game is a remake and not a remaster. A remake goes beyond just putting on a fresh coat of paint and might involve things like major changes to gameplay, features, the story, and so on. Now, wanting to make Halo Combat Evolved better is a commendable goal, and there are plenty of ways where Halo Combat Evolved can be improved, and especially since 343 had 5 years to make this game, 25 years of hindsight to draw inspiration from. There are features from later Halo games, even features from some of the 343 games that became beloved by the community that the original game with new graphics on a new engine would greatly benefit from. A big example that should stare anyone in the face is the original game did not ship with Xbox Live or online multiplayer. But imagine if, in addition to online multiplayer, we had the features of later games. Imagine if we had Forge and Firefight and Theater Mode and custom games with a million different parameters. Unfortunately, this is 343 we're talking about, and they're allergic to making money. Very early on, they announced there would be no multiplayer in Halo Campaign Evolved. One of the largest features of the original game, and a big reason why Halo was so popular in the first place, it's not included in this game. And the follow-on effects of that mean no Forge mode, no custom games, no map editor, no theater mode, no emergent gameplay that the developers couldn't even imagine, the type of minigames and subcultures that come from giving the community the tools to create whatever they want. This right here should have been the canary in the coal mine for anyone with a brain. If there was ever an opportunity to add online multiplayer to Halo Combat Evolved, let it be on the first time ever that a Halo game is released on PlayStation. Anyone with a fucking brain and likes the smell of money would tell you this was a totally asinine decision to not include multiplayer in this game. If this was really a cash grab, they could have tacked on the most basic, rudimentary, featureless multiplayer possible and sold this game as having multiplayer, and I promise you a lot of people would have bought this game that otherwise wouldn't have. For me personally, as someone that celebrates the maritime tradition, there is no incentive for me to purchase this game. In fact, the game was already cracked during the 5-day early access period you got for pre-ordering. So without multiplayer, we're just left to hope that the Remake's campaign is so good and so much better than the original that it can carry the whole project. In fact, they even announced they would give us 3 new missions on top of the original campaign. And since this is a remake and not a remaster, and they already wanted to change parts of the missions and story anyway, they could have made the missions play out very differently while still fitting the original narrative. As long as Master Chief starts and ends narratively where the major cutscenes, plot points, or chapters of each mission begin and end, you can drastically change the gameplay mechanics and objectives within each mission without affecting the overall story. For example, a big part of the second mission, and something we all tried to do in every mission as a kid, was save the Marines. If I wanted to remake Halo, I would probably flesh out some sort of squad mechanics or make the Marine AI better, or make them more useful, or find a way to integrate saving Marines in a more creative and rewarding way. The reason why the Marines all die at the start of the second mission is because Bungie didn't have the capability to path the Marine AI across this bridge without dying, or so the story goes. Having at least some of them live in this crash would fit thematically, it would fit the intent of the original game developers, have no major effect on the narrative, and would make this part of the game stand out from the original. They could also just make stuff cooler. Like, what if during the Pillar of Autumn a giant explosion rips a hole in the ship and you now have a space section like Halo 2's opening mission space sections? Now, to their credit, they did a really good job making the skybox of the Pillar of Autumn much better in the remake. But you hardly get to see it. A space section would have put that right in front of the player's face and shown them in the very first mission that this is a different game. There are just so many ways of expanding Halo Combat Evolved that I alone can think of that fit thematically while changing up the game in a meaningful way, that the idea of remaking the game should not automatically be dismissed. And with modern video game technology and the budget that these guys have, I'm pretty certain we can do everything I just mentioned and more. Even back in 2004, Bungie gave us a perfect example of this type of iterative, improving creative process in Halo 2's opening mission. Gameplay-wise, the Pillar of Autumn and Cairo Station serve the exact same purpose. They guide the player through narrow corridors, introducing them to gameplay mechanics one at a time, and they even take place in two very similar spaceship environments. But Halo 2's version is bigger and better and more badass than the Pillar of Autumn in terms of scale, map design, pacing, the intensity of the combat, the music, and the cutscenes. I mean, the intro cutscene gives us one of the most iconic lines in the series.
I need a weapon.
And then the ending cutscene doubles down and gives us an even more iconic line.
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
Probably the most iconic cutscene in the entire series. So if I were remaking Halo Combat Evolved, these might be some of the ways that I would consider to really set this apart from just an Earl Scheib special over one of the most beloved games of all time.
I'm Earl Scheib. I'll paint any car for just $99.95.
So, did 343 do anything even close to that? Well, to give credit where credit is due, they did do a good job remaking a lot of these environments. The mission 343 Guilty Spark in particular looks especially good. I already mentioned the skybox and the Pillar of Autumn, and the changes they made to the library gameplay-wise, I think most people are going to appreciate. For the most part, however, the missions play out beat for beat almost exactly the same as the original. And I won't even get into the 3 new missions. They've already been relentlessly mocked for that classic 343 writing and mission design that we all know and love.
Have you enjoyed your stay so far, Demon?
No, Sergeant Major, I'm not. Takes more than fancy armor and a good PR campaign to impress me.
So basically, 343 Industries thought that these 3 new missions and a campaign that's basically the same as the old one with shinier graphics and some other extraneous features like more skulls, they thought they would impress the consumer so much that they could get away with things like not having multiplayer in a Halo game. Far and away the worst thing they thought they could get away with, and this should be much more controversial than it has been, was the decision to revoice most of the original voice lines. Many of the major characters have totally new voice actors and extended or altered voice lines, but most of the lines are one-to-one with the original. Master Chief and Cortana are the same voice actors, but characters like Keyes and Johnson have totally new voice actors. This is juxtaposed against many of the original lines being kept in totality, like Fohammer's lines, for example. They announced they were going to revoice the game well ahead of release, and this should have been the biggest red flag for anyone that values the preservation of the original actors' performances, and even from a business or audio direction standpoint, this should have made everyone deeply inquire into what the fuck they were smoking at 343 Industries. As someone that just makes videos on YouTube, I understand seemingly better than 343 does the importance of audio. We can put up with a lot of visual changes and bad graphics or low resolution or weird cuts and jumps, but we are extremely sensitive to and made uncomfortable by changes in audio. And when that audio is a collection of sounds and voice lines that people have heard so many times, the slightest change will elicit an uncomfortable reaction. To show you how deep this arrogance at 343 Industries runs, when they first started making Halo 4, they seriously considered getting new voice actors for Master Chief and Cortana, until someone in management, thank God, told them that would have been a terrible business decision. But it did get to the point that they actually made Steve Downes and Jen Taylor audition for the roles that they'd been playing, very well I might add, for the last 11 years before 343 Industries was given control of Halo. Revoicing a game, especially one that's as replayed and well-known as Combat Evolved, even with the same voice actors, is just bound to sound uncanny. Fans of Halo are so used to hearing Sergeant Johnson and Captain Keyes and the original recordings of Master Chief and Cortana that to hear the same lines spoken in a slightly different tone at a slightly different pace is always going to sound at least a little bit wrong. Now, I understand that criticism is largely only applicable to someone who is already a fan of the original game. And one of the goals of this remake was to introduce a new audience to Halo, and so a person who's never played Halo before wouldn't really notice this as a change. The main problem with the new voice lines is that they just suck. They are significantly worse than the originals, the pacing lacks any sense of urgency, the tone lacks any sense of military bearing, and whatever voice acting direction was given, it certainly wasn't up to the same caliber of Marty O'Donnell or Joe Staten. Just compare some of these voice lines and tell me which one sounds better. And if you're someone that has never played Halo, tell me which one you prefer in the comments.
Cortana, all I need to know is did we lose them?
Cortana, all I need to know is did we lose them?
I think we both know the answer to that.
We made a blind jump. How did they...
Get here first? The Covenant ships have always been faster.
We made a blind jump. How did they...
Get here first? The Covenant ships have always been faster.
The original Captain Keyes is direct, stoic, confident. In the remake, he almost sounds afraid, almost defeated, and to me, it just sounds kind of like overacting the way he kind of draws out his lines. So which one do you think embodies the attitude that a full-bird fucking captain and Medal of Honor recipient would have? I'm not exactly sure what happened to Cortana, but Jen Taylor is a very talented voice actor. And instead of having this direct but sometimes sarcastic attitude to her voice lines, in the remake, she just sounds super bubbly and juvenile. And again, it sounds almost like overacting.
I knew it. The Autumn's accelerating. Keyes is going in manual. I knew it. The Autumn's accelerating. Keyes is going in manual. Oh. Do what? I have the index. You can just float and sputter.
Enough.
Do what? I have the index. You can just float and sputter. You have no idea how this ring works, do you? Why the Forerunners built it. Halo doesn't kill Flood, it kills their food. Humans, Covenant, whatever. You're all equally edible. The only way to stop the Flood is to starve them to death. And that's exactly what Halo is designed to do. Wipe the galaxy clean of all sentient life. You have no idea how this ring works, do you? Why the Forerunners built it? Halo doesn't kill Flood, it kills their food. Humans, Covenant, whatever. We're all equally edible. The only way to stop the Flood is to starve them to death. And that's exactly what Halo is designed to do. Wipe the galaxy clean of all sentient life. You don't believe me? Ask him.
The worst change of all was to Sergeant Johnson. Just compare these same lines between the old and new voice actor.
You heard the lady. Move like you got a purpose.
You heard the lady. Move like you got a purpose.
I don't care if it's God's own anti-son of a bitch machine or a giant hula hoop. We're not gonna let them have it. What we will let them have is a belly full of lead and a pool of their own blood to drown in.
Well, I don't care if it's God's own anti-son of a bitch machine or a giant hula hoop. We are not gonna let them have it. What we will let them have is a belly full of lead and a pool of their own blood to drown in.
So instead of Sergeant Major Johnson rattling off his iconic lines like a drill instructor,
You are nothing but unorganized, grabastic pieces of amphibian shit.
we now have Sergeant Major Steve Harvey, who talks extremely slow and tries to act way too cool and constantly smirks at the fucking camera. Why is he waxing poetic with an assault rifle going full cyclic next to his fucking head in a tight hallway? Right? Shouldn't he be shooting the aliens? Like, no one can hear you, Sergeant Johnson. These types of scenes don't need to be in the game, right? In the original, you could just tell Johnson was a badass from the few lines that he did have. And he was just a minor character. In fact, Johnson was such a minor character in the first game. The only reason he was recast in this remake was so 343 could shoehorn him into these half-assed prequel missions that no one asked for and evidently no one likes. In the original game, spoilers by the way, Johnson dies no less than 2 times. And he can die up to like 5 times because he was just a generic Marine in several missions. And of course, that joke even has to be ruined by 343 Industries, and now it needs a lore explanation of how Johnson survives Halo 1. This over-explaining and leaving nothing to the audience is exactly the type of writing that 343 is known and hated for, and yet they keep doing this with every single game. So if it's not clear, I'm of the opinion that the original voice lines are vastly superior to these new ones. This is another decision that makes absolutely no sense, even from a business standpoint. It takes significantly more effort to go through and revoice every single major line in the game and voice 3 new missions that no one asked for on top of it. They could have redone the cutscenes in the same vein as the originals, kept all of the original voice lines, that would have satisfied the fans, and new players wouldn't have known the difference. Now, I don't think you could produce any tangible evidence that revoicing the characters made this game any amount of money. And from a greater artistic preservation standpoint, I think it's important the new players hear the original performances that the original voice actors and voice directors and sound engineers worked hard on 25 years ago. This would also help bring these new players into the fold of people that appreciate these games, and they can share in appreciating a lot of these iconic lines and moments as they originally were. Instead, they not only spent all this time and money paying for these second-rate revoiced lines, only for fans like me to notice how uncanny and different they are, and for even non-Halo fans to mock how bad they are. The worst thing about them is they even removed some of the most iconic lines and replaced them with weird shit like this.
Don't keep it loaded, son. You'll have to find ammo as you go.
If all goes well, we'll rendezvous on the object's surface. And if it doesn't, make sure my daughter gets this.
So now, new players whose first exposure to Halo is this game, they won't get it when someone quotes the "I don't keep it loaded, son" line, and as someone whose main hobby is sports shooting, I have 100% used that line multiple times. Also, there's a couple lines like this where they imply that they're going to remake Halo 2 in this same manner because, of course, Keyes' daughter he's referring to here is Miranda Keyes, who is introduced in Halo 2, but was a character that wasn't even conceived of when the original Halo 1 launched. And by the way, I fucking hope they don't touch Halo 2, man. I hope to God they do not give Halo 2 the campaign evolved treatment. When I heard that line from Keyes right in the opening cutscene, I mean, I took it as a fucking threat of violence. I mean, the American Revolution was started for probably what amounted to less than this.
See you in the sequel.
So I can go on and on and on about the voice acting and new lines. My recommendation would be to watch one of the many of the side-by-side comparison videos on YouTube right now. In fact, there are tons of videos that put the old audio over the new cutscenes, and it's amazing how much more urgency the cutscenes are filled with when everyone isn't talking at half speed. But now let's go ahead and talk about the gameplay. The gameplay is largely based on Halo Reach, and from what I've researched, it appears that the game is basically Halo Reach's engine with an Unreal Engine and Halo Infinite skin suit. You can definitely tell it's Halo Reach with how the enemy AI moves and behaves. Now, when I was 10, I really liked Halo Reach, but having played through all the Halo games again as an adult and actually spending a lot of time playing Halo 3 multiplayer this year through the Master Chief Collection, I believe Halo Reach was definitely Bungie's weakest entry from a gameplay standpoint. In classic Halo gameplay, that is, Halos 1, 2, and 3 needed sprint and modernization about as much as Counter-Strike needs sprint and modernization. And I think if you've made it this far, you're probably not a fan of the direction that 343 has taken the games over the last 15 years. But you know, this is probably the point where someone who's a fan of Halo 4, 5, or 6's gameplay will say, oh great, another sprint hater, get over it. The thing about sprint in Halo is that it's never really been about sprint in a vacuum. And it has nothing to do with what, you know, some focus groups they had test the game thought about the movement feeling fluid and fast and punchy. The sprint debate in Halo has always been about the identity of Halo's core gameplay and how sprint and advanced movement infects and changes every aspect of the core gameplay from the ground up. Sprint is something that Bungie first introduced with Halo Reach as an armor ability. 343 Industries made it universal in their first game, Halo 4, and they've stuck to it and sworn by it ever since. And since then, Halo has only drifted further into irrelevance over the last 15 years of leaning more into this sprint and loadout system and pseudo aim down sights and advanced movement and grappling hooks and all this sort of stuff that essentially Call of Dutyized Halo over the years, starting with Reach. And as much as we hate to admit it, Reach did add sprint and jetpacks and armor lock and loadouts without a lot of thought put into how this would affect the sandbox, and it did radically change the art style to be more gritty and military to compete with the trends that Call of Duty 4, World at War, and Modern Warfare 2 were setting at that time. And this massive reduction in popularity and relevance since Halo Reach, and especially really with Halo 4, is largely because of trend chasing. Trend chasing, to be more like the competitor, is anathema for video games that are already great in their own respect. If this were a game series that was still trying to find its footing, sure, try new things, implement mechanics from some of the most popular games out there, see how they play out. But when you're talking about a game like Halo, that soared to the highest highs of relevance and popularity that a video game could ever achieve, you just don't do that. Instead, you identify and double down on what makes your game unique. A perfect example of this is how a game like RuneScape, which was the most popular MMORPG at one point, totally grenaded itself by trying to make its combat and art style more like World of Warcraft. It completely fragmented their community and tanked their player base. But RuneScape is an example of a developer that truly listened to what the players were asking for and completely corrected course when they released old school RuneScape. They made creative decisions with old school that kept its identity and uniqueness intact. And today, the old school version of the game is more popular than the game game has ever been before. And it did that by going back to the original unique art style and especially gameplay, which, much like classic Halo's gameplay, appears simple on the surface, but actually has an incredible amount of depth as you master the mechanics. And the fact that a big, soulless corporation like Jagex, who fell into the same traps of trend chasing that first Bungie did with Halo Reach, and then 343 completely doubled and tripled down on, the fact that Jagex could turn RuneScape completely around to where it's now even eclipsing World of Warcraft in relevance all these years later, gives me hope that Halo can also reverse course and become relevant again. And so you'd think, after 15 years of this managed decline, the lessons of other games that fell to trend chasing, Tales of Redemption in a game like RuneScape, now in 2026, we have an opportunity for Halo to go back where the game started with a Halo Combat Evolved remake. You would think that this would be the perfect opportunity for 343 to try something different by going back to the classic movement and classic gameplay design, especially if they added multiplayer. And I bring up Counter-Strike all the time as an example of a first-person shooter that stuck to its guns, kept its identity intact, and is basically unchanged since the original release back in 2000. Today, Counter-Strike is the most popular first-person shooter, and it doesn't have sprint, it doesn't have advanced movement, it doesn't have aiming down the sights, it doesn't have loadouts or kill streaks, it doesn't have hit markers, and so on. What Counter-Strike has is a company behind it that believes in their own product that they designed. And what they've done first with CSGO and now CS2, which is basically a glorified update, is they have taken this game, frozen it in time fundamentally, and have kept the game alive through quality of life updates, community events, esports, and most importantly, not fundamentally altering the game in a way that would alienate this community of fans they've spent 26 years building. Old school RuneScape has also done this beautifully with content updates and balancing and quality of life changes and holiday events, and they even go one step further by only implementing new content if the community approves it through in-game polling with a significant majority. With this direction, old school RuneScape now has existed far longer than RuneScape originally existed, from the initial release to the 2007 version of the game, which old school RuneScape was meant to emulate. It has completely eclipsed RuneScape 3, the version of the game that lost its identity, and in the space of MMORPGs, it is possibly the most relevant MMO out there right now. And that same kind of treatment is what I think Halo 3 really deserved. Halo 3 should have been the real Halo Infinite, and basically should have just had quality of life updates and community events and map packs and additions to Forge and more parameters and props to play with and custom games and mod support added and eventual PC ports and fixes and rebalancing the maps and game modes, stuff like that over the last 19 years to keep it active and relevant and unique. We have the blueprint right in front of us with games like Counter-Strike and old school RuneScape, so why can't 343 Industries take a hint? This would have been a perfect opportunity for them to restart and correct course. If I wanted a game with sprint that plays like Modern Warfare 2019, I'll go play the new Call of Duty or Battlefield game or any of the other games that have tried to copy COD in the years since. If I want to play Halo, I want to play Halo. I want to play a game that is different, with a different pace, with a different time to kill, a different style of gameplay where you have to remember weapon spawns and timers, gameplay where advanced movement involved learning skill-based tricks like grenade jumps, crouch jumps, rocket jumps, gravity hammer assists, and so on. Watching high-level gameplay of the classic Halo games will completely call out the lies you're told whenever a modern game developer talks about how great their advanced movement system is. All of these points I'm making are points that could have been made even before the game released. The fact of the matter is that the fundamental gameplay changes that 343 Industries made from the very beginning and continues to double down on has nothing to do with just the game and whether it's fun in this exact moment. It has everything to do with Halo's core identity and where Halo's gameplay sits as a unique offering among so many other games out there in the market. So while some people might have some fun for some amount of time with the new mechanics wearing a Halo theme, a truly great game is one where you can't get that experience anywhere else. And I get that feeling still when I play Halo 3 multiplayer, even in its neutered state as part of the Master Chief Collection. There has not been a game since then that plays like classic Halo, and it's an absolute travesty that we have new Halo games releasing that continue to try implementing features that were trendy 15 years ago. So if 343 Industries were really interested in making Halo successful, they would have been bold and gone back to the original style of Halo's gameplay. That would have absolutely made waves in the news cycle when this game was announced, and would have at least piqued the interest of some old fans like me to start dipping their toes back into this series that's betrayed their expectations for the last 15 years. Especially if they heavily advertised this return to form in the months leading up to release, and especially if they included multiplayer. but that was simply too bold of a decision for 343 to make. So, in conclusion, we have a remake of Halo Combat Evolved that has significantly less features than the original released 25 years ago. We have remade missions that are only marginally different from the originals. We have costly creative decisions that disrespect the original artwork, will most likely disappoint fans and create a divide between old and new fans. And we have a game whose gameplay follows in the same footsteps of 343's other failed Halo-inspired games, rather than the original Halo games. But these are merely symptoms of a studio that has no consequences for failing, whose primary goal is not doing what needs to be done to make Halo insanely popular, to turn Halo back into the massive cash cow and system seller it was back in the early 2000s. 343 Industries have a vision for Halo, and they want to impress this horrible vision of Halo, their idea of art, onto the world, whether we like it or not. And this remake, more than any of their other games, shows this arrogance and contempt for the fans, and in yet another hubristic episode, they failed to make a copy of a game that even comes close to the vastly superior original. A game that was made 25 years ago with far fewer resources, far less time, far fewer employees, on brand new technology, and without the benefit of 25 years of hindsight. So I dub Halo Studios, formerly 343 Industries, the first non-profit AAA game developer. If they wanted to make money, they would make a good game. And this extends for the rest of the games industry, especially when we're talking about beloved franchises that have just become terrible over the years. So stop blaming greed and management and corporations and start blaming people. Let's start holding accountable these mid-wit game developers at AAA game studios who think that they are artistic geniuses and start forcing them to make fun, cool video games again. They have names and they're responsible for the destruction and humiliation of some of our favorite video game series. So, with all of that said, if you've watched to this point, I sincerely thank you all for hearing me out. I've been meaning to make a video about Halo for a while, and I think this was the perfect opportunity. Let me know what you think about some of the stuff I've discussed here and the new Halo. Also, I'll leave a pinned comment with some other videos on Halo Campaign Evolved that I liked. Some positive, some neutral, some negative. That way you can hear some other perspectives. Thank you to my channel members and Patreon supporters for supporting the channel directly. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.